So after I do the intro, are you?
Is it time?
We still
No,
have.
keep playing, Kim. Keep
Do I
playing.
still have time? Should all acquaintance be forgot, and never brought to mind? Should all acquaintance all be forgot, and all lang syne? So that was Philip Wesley's Union, followed by Old Lang Syne. And I'm going to take a quick break and move to the harp. So I'll be right back if I have time. And I will stop and come right back. Okay.
Turn the volume up.
You guys have time for a little harp?
Yes, we do. 8 more minutes, Kim, please.
Oh, 4 minutes. Oh, gotcha. Okay.
8.
8 minutes.
Yes.
Okay, so let me get this. Pardon my reach. This is called A Day at the Lake. I wrote this and my best friend Kathy thought of the title. So here we go. And then finally, I'm going to end with a little Celtic tune called Charles O'Connor. And I believe this is from poet. Let's look at the title really quick. Mel Bay, Lori Riley. Make sure I have my C sharp. I'm playing a Lion and Hilly Prelude Lever 40 harp. So I've got to change the levers. Happy New Year, everybody. Oh, thank you.
Kim, we still have 4 minutes if you have more
Oh, I have
tools
more
for
minutes.
us.
Okay, I will go through something in my mug if I have time. Let's try this. have to fix my background next time. Is there more time or? Oh, thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
very much, Kim.
Thank you.
That was wonderful.
Oh, thank you, everybody.
We're so
It was my pleasure to be here.
we're so glad we have you. Okay, looks like the crew on the ground are ready. You need to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody to the first meeting of the Orange County Astronomers for the wonderful year of 2024. At least we hope it will be a wonderful year. It is at least starting off cold like winter, which is, I guess, nice unless you happen to be out without enough warm clothes under the stars. Anyway, we do have a really great program tonight, and I won't take much time before we turn it over to the next event. But this is a reminder, it's our last night of our election. If you haven't voted yet and you are down here in the auditorium, we do have some ballots. And we have a ballot box. And if you are not here, or if you prefer to do it electronically, we still have that option available. Just you have got to get it in by midnight. May the best people win, right? And anyway, I think without more ado, I will turn it over to Helen, who has kindly taken on doing the announcements tonight. Please give her a warm welcome.
Hi, everybody. I'm Helen Mahoney, former president of OCA and current board member until midnight. I'm not running this time. Wanted to turn it over to some new blood, so there's new people running. All right, thank you very much for coming tonight, either in person or virtual. Go ahead. We want to welcome our new members, Carl Berry and Jeffrey Bethel. Your name tags will probably be over here on the whiteboard. And we also have some for people who joined in the preceding months and haven't picked them up yet. So they're right over here on our whiteboard. So events coming up, star parties, please check the OCA web calendar for updates. But the ANZA Star Party is scheduled for January 13th, which is tomorrow, because we are very close to new moon. The Orange County Star Party, we're still working on getting those arrangements, so that's to be announced. Our special interest group meetings, we have the Astrophysics SIG, January 19th, 7 p.m., and that is at the Heritage Museum. That's an in-person event. The beginners class is February 2nd at 7:30, and that's also at the Heritage Museum. The OCA board meeting is January 28th at 10:30 a.m. and that is online. So check the OCA website calendar and you can link onto the events from there. Our outreach program right now is on hold. If you have questions or inquiries, you can contact OCA at outreach@ocaastronomers.org. And the voting is still underway, as Barbara said. You should have gotten an email if you're a member. If you'd like to vote electronically, you can find that email, and it's very easy. You just click the thing; it links to it. You punch your little ballot thing, and click submit, and it's done. If you're here tonight and you'd like to do it in person, she told you how to do that. And then at midnight, everything is finished and they will count the ballots and publish it on the website. Okay. This is the candidate slate. You can see that. Go ahead. Our Adoptoscope program is still up and running. You can download the adoption agreement, download the current inventory, and we have a new Adoptoscope person, so you can reach them. Check the resources on this is our website, the Orange County Astronomers, ocaastronomers.org, and just click on Adoptoscope, and that will give you some more information. And then a serious astronomer, our newsletter. David Fisher is our editor. You can contact him at newsletter at ocastronomers.org. He loves to get good articles. If you have some images to provide for him, anything that you would like, things for sale, you can contact him and get it in the Serious Astronomer. Everybody who is a member gets a Serious Astronomer paper copy in the mail. If you want to help out with the saving trees, you can do it online. Everybody can reach the website, and there's a spot that says newsletter, and you can read it, and it's in color online. So that's kind of a plus. So if you want to only get it online and stop getting it in the mail, then send your instructions to Charlie at ocastronomers.org. Please remember, if you have a pad out at ANZA, to do weed site clearance. We've had some rain and we're expecting some more, and usually we have quite a lot of weeds by the spring, and then that turns into fire hazard by the summer. So please keep your pad and observatories clear.
They're easier to cut when they're little.
Very true. And then if you have a chance to clear the areas around our common areas, like the football field, the Coon Observatory, that would be greatly appreciated. Tonight's moon phase is a waxing crescent, only 1% illuminated, a teeny little baby moon. A few days ago, I was able to see a waning crescent only 3 days before the new moon. And it's always kind of fun because I saw it after the sun had come up, and looked out and kind of, because I knew where it was, I looked, and yeah, there it was. I used to be able to see Venus in the morning, but I think it's dropped down a little bit. I haven't been able to see it. It's probably down behind my neighbor's house, but it's always fun to see that. And there was an occultation. The moon passed in front of Antares. Some of the people were out and photographing that from our club. So I missed that, but other people got nice pictures of that. So hopefully they'll be on the website. All right, so our main speaker will be here. He's here. He'll be up here talking in a few minutes. I just want to make a brief thing because I know Ray's is going to introduce him, but I've been with Joel Harris on at least 3 Eclipse trips, and so I was really happy to see him tonight. Looking forward to his talk. The next meeting will be Friday, February 9th, 2024, right here, same time, same station. And so tonight's presentations will be What's Up by Chris Butler, and then our featured speaker, Joel Harris, the second great North American solar eclipse. So now it is my privilege and pleasure to introduce to you the galaxy's favorite What's Up man, Chris Butler.
Hi, everybody, and hello to all you people at home. I do want to say one more thing about tonight's speaker, because Joel and I have been friends for a very long time. I also have been on one of his magnificent trips, but he holds the special distinction in all the world that an artist never forgets. 34 years ago, he bought the very first painting I ever sold, and bless your heart for that. And it was also the last painting I ever sold, but I can't hold that against him. The magic button, this one. All right. Okay, here we go with the What's Up, folks. Let's see if we can find a way to do this. Oh, where's the pointy thingy? It's over here.
I'll change the slides and you point to.
Oh, wow. All right, let's do this. He's just, I'm the one supposed to be somebody's butler, but he's going to change the slides for me. Okay, let's go ahead and jump in. Next slide, please. Looking at the sun, what's going on with the sun? Well, of course, the sun's behavior changing a little bit. We're past the winter solstice. We are starting to get a little bit more daylight. Bad for you guys, good for all of the other clubs that meet on campus. But sunset, 5 o'clock still. It's actually quite early. By 6, it's getting pretty good and dark. Sunrise, still pretty late, 6:57 a.m. We got 10 hours and 5 minutes of sunlight now. And of course, that means we've got 14 hours of darkness, whatever. That's going to change fairly rapidly as we start getting through the winter and closer to spring. Solar noon is, of course, the time when the sun is actually at its highest. Many times that won't be close to noon. It wanders a little bit for reasons that are very complicated, but by now it happens to be at this time of year very, very close to the truth. So noon is noon, but that will go all to heck in just another week or two. So don't expect.
While we don't notice the length of the day, here in Fairbanks, the day changes by 6 minutes a day.
6 minutes a day. Wow, yeah, seasonal affective disorder. It's bad news. Glorious. Thank you. Next picture, please. We just talked about the moon, and we just had our new moon, which was on January 11th. We're talking about that really, really thin moon. I saw that this evening. I don't know how many of you saw that very thin crescent. Boy, that was just a sliver tonight. But we're going to have more and more of the moon in the evening sky over the next couple of weeks here. January 17th will be the half-lit moon in the evening sky. And the moon for the next several weeks will be very convenient for stargazers who love the moon, coming up to January 25th for the full moon. And so that's a little look at what the moon is up to. Next slide, please. Run through the moon. Now we'll run through the planets. Mercury, I don't get up in the mornings. If you do, Mercury's not bad right now. It's at elongation, farthest from the sun, but in the morning sky. Chart to follow, you'll see in a moment. But if you're a Mercury fan and you're up at that hour, why not? There's nothing else to do. Except be in traffic on the 405, trust me. Venus is also in the morning sky, as has been mentioned. It's brilliant before dawn. Mars is in the morning sky, but really technically in the morning sky. It's still just crawling out from behind the sun, and Mars is not at its biggest, brightest. It's not most obvious, and it really is still lost in the glow of the approaching dawn. So not a good time for Mars. Not so for Jupiter. Jupiter is basically straight overhead right now, pretty close to that, and it is blazing away. It is brilliant. It is the thing all of your weird conspiracy neighbors think is a UFO, watching them. Probably, but it's up most of the night, so really good time to look at Jupiter. Saturn is visible once it gets dark, but it's already headed down, so you've got to catch it really early, and it's getting down in the murk. So I wouldn't recommend Saturn. If you want to look at Uranus, you should, every 10 years, you got to go in. Just saying, from recent personal experience, it's important. If you want to check it out, beautifully placed right now. Neptune is an evening object. It doesn't set till 10 odd o'clock in the evening, but it is so faint that it's probably best to wait until you see it really high in a long time dark sky. Wouldn't recommend it. Pluto is, number one, about to go behind the sun. That will slightly dim its appearance in a telescope. Normally, Pluto casts shadows. It's so bright. It was worshipped by ancient people around the world. I do this because college students sometimes come in here, and I love to give them this stuff to take back to their professors. Anyway, I'm sorry. It's one of the perks that comes with this job. Next slide, please. We said about 6 o'clock, the sky is dark. I normally don't show a what's up chart at 6 in the evening, but it really is getting dark enough you might start your observing. You can see that sliver of the moon is marked there all the way screen right. Saturn, again, on its way down. You're going to have a tough time really getting much out of it. Neptune also getting ready to go down, but Uranus and Jupiter crowning the sky overhead at 6. Next slide, please. By 9 o'clock, you've still got Jupiter and Uranus beautifully placed for a long period of time. I do want to make a point. You're going to see some stuff about the Milky Way in our slides. The Milky Way is theoretically there. You cannot see it from Los Angeles or Orange counties, but yeah, I am told that it is actually there. That's what that glowing thing is. It's not a chemtrail. That's the Milky Way. Next picture, please. By midnight, Jupiter is finally getting ready to lay it down in the west. And you've got constellations like Gemini, the twins, all of the bright constellations of Winter Orion, the Hunter, and so forth are pretty much straight overhead with the springtime constellations already visible. So if you're a midnight person and you're interested in looking at galaxies, those are going to be in the eastern part of the sky, especially over in the constellations we normally think of as springtime, meaning in the spring, they'll be up at a more civilized hour. Just saying, you might want to wait. Next picture, please. If you do stay up till 6, sky's starting to lighten over there in the eastern part of the sky. You can see the other planets we mentioned. Venus blazing away and not caring about that approaching dawn. It will be visible. Mercury, again, never gets too far away from the sun. It's actually swung out about as far as it gets right now, but you could catch it if you look early. Mars, tiny, just completely as dim as it gets and lost in the haze. So now we talk about Milky Way. I mentioned that because the winter constellations boast among the winter constellations Milky Way constellations. We don't think of them that way because of this. We think of them like the summer Milky Way that you see here with that big, bright Milky Way that you can get if you're out in the countryside anyway. You certainly have these astounding areas like over here in the constellation of Sagittarius, the Archer, the center of our galaxies over here, and the constellations going on up through here like Cygnus and Lyra and all those. That's what I think of as Milky Way, and especially with the big giant nebulae, the big gas clouds like the Lagoon, the Trifid, the Eagle, the Swan, all of these things going to, even the North American Nebula, all of these going through. That's what I think of as being a Milky Way constellation. But the winter time really is quite different. Next picture, please. This is actually from the July, what's up? And you can see here that big, giant, thick part of the Milky Way that's down in here, and this band of divided Milky Way with the dark dust lanes here going up through the summer triangle constellations. This is normally what we think of as Milky Way, but notice it continues on over through constellations like Cepheus and so forth. We're going to look at the other side tonight as you explore the winter constellations and look at them. I've never done this. Look at them as Milky Way constellations and focus on the Milky Way and the great nebulae that are contained within them. Next picture, please. Oh, see, isn't that right in the next picture? Yeah, oh, it is. Okay, yeah, go for that. We'll use that. This is the winter picture that we talked about. If you're about 9 o'clock, you've got the summer constellations are completely gone there. But the constellations like Cepheus, Cassiopeia, Perseus, down through Auriga, down in here. You got the Gemini twins here, Orion, Taurus, going all the way down into the southeast with Sirius, brightest of all the nighttime stars, and then going on down below our horizon here. In a dark condition, you can see the winter Milky Way, but it is not this overpowering thing because we're not looking towards the center of our galaxy. We're looking pretty much away from the center of our galaxy into the outskirts. It's like looking at Barstow. There just isn't much there. But actually, there's more there than you think. Barstow has a bowling alley. They have a 2-story tall McDonald's. Seriously, there's more in Barstow than you think. There's also more in this part of the sky as far as real Milky Way. And we'll jump in next. Next picture, please. Cepheus here, the king, this constellation looks like a house here. This is right next door to those summer constellations that are right over there, like Cygnus the Swan. This is an autumn constellation. It's pretty low, actually, in the northeast right now. It's where you'd start patrolling along the Milky Way. This fairly long exposure picture here does show you the band of the Milky Way really does truly run through this constellation. You can see the star clouds, and you can see, even if it's not blindingly bright, you can see some of the great nebulae that are there. Some of them like IC 1396, named for the number of stars you can see in it. Just teasing. Yeah, no, that's cool. That's cool. Thank you. You were laughing too hard. That's a good sign. Now buy a painting, all right? Um, this here is the most famous one. I wanted to show you one of the exotic ones. Maybe you hadn't thought about it. There are other targets out here for Milky Way things. The Cave Nebula is located off here. There are all kinds of little discoveries you can make. Here's a photograph, a long exposure photograph of the Cave Nebula. That's an example of one I admit I've never seen. I've never actually, I love the name too, Sharpless 155. Very hard to focus on. Next picture, please. Cassiopeia, the Queen, one of my favorite constellations in the north right now. Looks like a W or an M, depending on which way you're standing. Supposedly, this is the throne of a queen, and she's here, and that's her chair, and this is like her footrest. Or it's a W or it's an M, okay, basically. But you can see the Milky Way pours through this constellation here and does interesting things too. The dark clouds that we're so used to in the summer Milky Way that actually split it in two, they're here too. They actually divide the Milky Way. The north part of Cassiopeia is flooded by this dark dust in space that brings the glow of the stars. We can really see it much more in the bottom half of the constellation than in the top. Now, there's plenty of other things you could look for here. The famous double clusters right over the border in Perseus, the usual suspects, all the things you'd normally look at. But may I suggest NGC 281? Do you know the gang up at Griffith with their telescopes? They look at this all the time. They show it to the public. The Pac-Man Nebula, shown in the picture there. They actually, this is a regular in their scope. So even fairly modest scopes, even in city conditions, you can detect it a little bit, okay? But these are the people coming out of Laserium. They're going to think they're seeing things no matter what. You know how it is. I'm teasing. But look over here off the end of Cassiopeia, the Heart Nebula. I've heard of that one, but I didn't know somebody put a Soul Nebula next to it. I like that. Seriously, I'm not kidding. I'm not making up these names. These are real, like the sciencey names. And the picture, next picture, but you want to see a neat looking nebula, Heart Nebula. Wow. And it looks just like this through my 8-inch telescope. Just like this. After an edible. Just kidding. About something. Anyway, this is a beautiful nebula that most people don't pay attention to. But for you astro imagers, Cassiopeia, the Heart Nebula. Give it a try. Next picture, please. Perseus, of course, Perseus Jackson from the Percy and the the Olympiads, whatever, on TV now. So Percy here has in it a whole bunch of things I always look at. I love looking at the bright stars around the bright star Murphak here. Of course, the double cluster in the top of the constellation, beautiful star clusters. But for nebula, you can see the Milky Way passing through here. There's a beautiful nebula down there, the California Nebula. And there is the California Nebula. There is, however, something inherently wrong with this. We all know California is blue on the coasts and red on the interior, and this is completely wrong. These colors are completely wrong. Just kidding. Next picture, please. Camelopardalis, the heart of your stargazing experience, the giraffe constellation, is almost a Milky Way constellation too. Not most of the giraffe. This is supposed to be the head of a giraffe. Okay, they're really reaching on this one. These are supposed to be its feet, and its feet are trotting in the Milky Way that floods through here. And there are, well, there's dark dust lanes and things like this in there. You see some of the star clouds. And here is Vandenberg 15. And there is a beautiful photograph of this reflection nebula down in the bottom of Camelopardalis. Who'd have thunk it? Next picture, please. Auriga is a well-known constellation for showing off Milky Way splendors, especially star clusters, M35, M30, oh, actually M36, 37, 38, all kinds of things through the heart of the constellation of the Charioteer. You drive through here, there's lots to see in this part of the sky. This is particularly the IC405 or the Flaming Star Nebula that's shown here in this photograph. Actually, anywhere in the center of Auriga or Auriga, however you want to pronounce it, this is one of those constellations that has a lot to show off, and it does remind you it really is a Milky Way constellation. Next picture, please. Taurus the Ford is another constellation that it doesn't, we don't normally think of it as being Milky Way, But Milky Way isn't all about bright star clouds in our galaxy. It's also about dark dust clouds. And that's really where this constellation shows off. The Milky Way floods through here, okay, going down into Orion, which is down this way. But notice the absence of stars in kind of an area like this. This is the Taurus dark cloud, a giant dust cloud in our galaxy, and the closest one to us that's forming stars and planets right now. It's not the Orion Nebula, it's the Taurus dark cloud, about 400 light years away, or the closest star forming areas. And because of that, there are some wonderfully beautiful things hidden in the Taurus dark cloud. I've noted two really special things. NGC 1555 here, and then way out here, Samis, Samis 147. I love the look of this thing, the spaghetti nebula, photographs to follow. There's NGC 1555, Hines variable nebula around the star T Tauri, forming star. And if you're ready for the spaghetti nebula, next picture, please. Yeah. It's faint, all right? It doesn't look like this to your eyes. Everything about the winter sky, you got to work for it, except the Orion Nebula and blah, blah, blah. We'll get to that. But this is a wonderful remnant of a supernova that exploded a long time ago. Next picture, please. Here's a deep picture of Taurus. If the lights were out, it would freak you out even more. There are clouds of stuff everywhere. Do you remember when you saw pictures of the Pleiades star cluster? You used to think, I wonder if those are clouds of gas associated with the Pleiades. And that they, ooh, check. This is a full service club. Wow. I really used to think that the Pleiades, where it was a big deal that they had nebula around it. They're just lighting up the little part they're in. We can see little hazy glow around them, but the whole constellation is swathed in dark dust and glowing material. Really beautiful. Oh, by the way, there's the California Nebula again, post-edible. Over here is another one that's our good Samis supernova remnant over in there, and Flaming Star Nebula up in there. Next picture, please. Gemini, actually, you'd figure, being a famous constellation, would have a lot more Milky Way associations. Really doesn't. The twins, it's only their tootsies really get into it. With the heads of the twins marked by the bright stars there, their feet get down into it a little bit. And this nebulosity down here, you see actually the two stars here. These are two red stars marking the feet of Castor, the twin. That is a nebulosity all through there, but these are those two stars in that picture. So you can see that there, it's easy to find. Three-way close. Next picture, please. This is a wide view of the entire Milky Way region that we've just been playing, and you can see the band of the Milky Way going through constellations like Taurus and Auriga. Remember the Flaming Star Nebula there. Orion, of course, is a complete mess, and we'll get to it just real quickly. Next picture, please. Yeah, Orion, blah, blah, blah. Orion is, every year I got to talk about Orion. Of course, it looks like a person, 2 stars for shoulders, 2 stars for knees, 3 for a belt, and this sword down here. Of course, famously, the Great Orion Nebula. Close-up picture, if you get in there, is all of this with the belt stars there. Giant arc of Barnard's Loop goes all the way through this from an old supernova explosion. Of course, M42, the Orion Nebula there, the famous Horsehead. But you can see here, it's really, the whole constellation is just crazy with nebulosity. If it was brighter overall, you'd really be thinking of it more like a Sagittarius or a Scorpius. It's a little bit dimmer, but really cool things in small pockets. Famous pictures there for you just because they're obligatory. Next picture, please. Monoceros is a hole in the sky. There are almost no bright stars, but there is Milky Way. Seriously, if you look at it, you can actually see the glow of all those star clouds coming through there. And there are indeed some famous nebulae in there, like the famous Rosette Nebula. The Christmas tree cluster is up here near the Cone Nebula and so forth. But there are others hiding in there all through the constellation, including the Seagull Nebula. I'd never heard of the Seagull, I got to admit. But that's an example. This is a picture here with the Rosette here and the whole complex around the Cone Nebula up here. Next picture, please. Canis Major, the supposed dog that's I think looks like a surfer, but they really worked hard here to try and make it look like a dog. So, all right, it's a dog. It too has some, of course, Milky Way going all the way through, and you can see little patches of nebulosity. But up here is the wonderfully evocatively titled Thor's Helmet. Good classic nebula there. So I think it looks more like Loki, but you know, I'm just kind of a low key guy. Next picture, please. It depends how, in astronomy, it depends how far you want to push it. When a hobby becomes a disease, you're headed to pupus. Okay. All the way over the horizon, pushing by sheer force of will the Earth to get out of the way so you can see the southern constellations. And if you want to try, NGC 2467 is a teaser, the beginning of all the Milky Way down there. But if it looks like something on the right, something is very wrong with you. Okay. It's not that bright, folks, but wow, that's beautiful. Long exposure picture. Next picture here. And the last, this is that bridge of Milky Way over the winter constellations, just about as cold as it feels outside tonight, starting all the way over in the summer constellations through Cassiopeia, all the rest of this. Through Auriga over in here, there's those Pleiades that you know now are all part of that Taurus dark cloud material around them. And there's Orion hiding right there. And you can see it really does flood through Monoceros down into the surfer that looks like a dog over there. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, giving you all those things to look for, I will leave you in peace. Thank you very much.
What a nice job.
Wonderful, Chris. Thank you very much for this great presentation. You always enlighten us. So without any further ado, let me go ahead into introducing our speaker tonight, who has been traveling throughout the world to observe solar eclipses since 1973, totaling 50 years of eclipse chasing, encompassing some 22 total eclipse events, and having spent over an hour within the lunar umbra. He has spent 17 years in the defense and aerospace industries as a senior systems engineer, and has also been awarded the NASA's Group Achievement Award for his public relations work as Project Information Officer supporting the Galileo project at Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Please join me in welcoming Joel Harris. Joel.
I am. Thank you, Rez. I really appreciate it. As always, it's a real pleasure to be able to address the OCA members both here in the flesh, as they would say, and also, of course, now in a virtual sense in cyberspace. So welcome, everybody. Couple things sort of off topic, I suppose, a little bit, although really not necessarily that way. Number one, and I know he's heard me say this so many times, he's sick of it. One of the rules of presentation that anybody gives a talk, or in my case, lectures when I'm over at Cal State, is you never follow kids, animals, or Chris Butler, because that's really a hard thing to follow. But the other thing I wanted to acknowledge, by the way, Chris, you're right. I do still have that painting you did of We Have LDEF. It has a honored space in my office, along with those other, or a couple of other ones you did of Shoemaker Levy impacting Jupiter. So yeah, I mean, it brings some real joy to me in terms of seeing those. One other thing, and I probably run a risk here, but since Chris is so great at levity, I'll give a very short, and some people will cringe, mathematical joke here for a minute. So basically, a couple of ions were in a bar, and they were drinking. They were drinking, had several drinks, and got done with everything. They paid their bill. And so they walked out, and they were walking down the street. And all of a sudden, one of the ions stops and looks at the other one and says, "Oh my gosh, I think I left my car keys in the bar. And the other ion looks at him and says, "Are you sure?" And he goes, "Yes, I'm positive." Sorry, couldn't resist. Cannot resist that. Anyway, on to the meat of this evening's session and talk. As you can see, again, the title is very appropriately the Second Great North American Solar Eclipse. And just a little background. I know Reza was very nice in kind of going over a little of my background and also, again, some of the things that I've been fortunate enough to be involved in. As it says here, and again, I'm not going to read every word up here, death by PowerPoint. I've been chasing eclipses basically for some 51 years now, going all the way back to 1973. The June 30th, exceptionally long eclipse that occurred, most of it over Western and Central Africa. And again, quite an experience. I found out about that eclipse from, among other things, watching a episode, boy, this is going to age me, of Dick Cavett, where he had a gentleman named Bob Citron on there talking about his company that was called, at the time, Educational Expeditions International, or EEI. It's now called Earthwatch, out of Boston, the Boston area. And I made up my mind at that point that I wanted to get involved in that and be part of that. So indeed, I went ahead and signed up with about 35 other crazy people to be in the Sahara Desert for 2.5 weeks, camping out there in the middle of June. And once again, after then, I kind of, without question, caught the bug, if you will, became what I like to call an Umbra addict. And as a result of that, again, as you heard from Reza, in the 50 some odd years since then, I've seen 21 other totals and a small handful of annulars, about 5 annulars. I am not the person that has the most totals under my belt. There's about 5 or 6 folks in front of me. But again, it's not a competition. It's really, if you will, a passion, a real strong passion of mine that I've been following. And again, after about 1983, I did start organizing trips for the lay public as well as paraprofessional astronomers to come in my, if you will, orbit, so to speak, and see these events. Why did I do that? A couple of reasons. And by the way, it absolutely is not mercenary. It's more because I want people, as many as possible, to experience totality and see what that is like. There's, as Chris talked about a little while ago, there's such a plethora of really dramatic and wonderful looking objects, deep sky objects, as well as planetary things that we can see virtually any clear night, depending on what time of year you're going to be doing that. But as far as a profound experience, as far as something that is emotionally really riveting, I think there's very few things in nature, if you will, other than a total solar eclipse, especially for somebody the first time they see one. It really, unless you're, I guess, forgive me, brain dead or something, it truly is quite a moving experience. The most recent excuse me, total I saw was not quite a year ago, about 9 months ago. Myself and my wife Patty of 23 years, almost 24 now, and my good friend Steve Edberg from Jet Propulsion Laboratory, one of the resident astronomers there, just retired after many years, and his wife. We went to extreme northwestern Australia in the small town of Exmouth, where we saw a whopping 54-second hybrid total. And it was really quite dramatic. In fact, we've got some video we'll show you in a couple of minutes. Next slide, if we can, Doug. As I talked about a little bit a moment ago, my first experience in 73 in Mauritania, it was a great opportunity because in back of me here, as you can see up on the screen, the person who was really leading the expedition was none other than Dr. Donald Menzel, who was, in his time, really one of the premier solar astronomers in the world. Don worked at and was very integral at Harvard Observatory back in Massachusetts. Don really was the, if you will, Ubermeister of the experiment I was involved with about 5 other people. We had a spectrograph. We were taking pictures of the sun's outer corona. And again, it was a really dramatic experience. I had never participated in any kind of scientific investigation or anything like that. I was actually a business major when I was in undergraduate and graduate school. So that really struck me. It really made an impression on me. Yeah, again, Don was really something. He was 83 years old when he was out there with us. And again, he was a hardy guy. He was living out there with us in 120-degree heat. And people were saying, gee, Dr. Menzel, isn't this really, difficult for you? It's really hot and everything. So, oh, no, this is nothing. I was in Siberia in 1932 when it was like, 30 degrees below zero, and it was really cold. So, it's just, I guess everything's relative. If we get the next slide here, as I said, this was a long time ago. I think I recognize the guy in this picture when he had maybe a little more hair or something. I had some hair on his lip too, I think. But suffice to say, this clearly, I think, underscores it. This is well over half a century ago. So obviously things took off from there. Next slide. So a little bit of some other stats. Once again, I won't bore everybody going through each one of these line by line. But as you heard again a little bit from Reza, I've had 22 totals under my belt, just over about an hour actually in totality, the third line there. But again, I've been so many places around the world. Longest eclipse, again, actually in terms of just duration from first to fourth contact was back in 83, but the longest total that actually I've seen that was involved with after my first eclipse was in 1991. Of course, the great eclipse had occurred both over the big island of Hawaii. I was actually in Baja, Mexico, down near Cabo San Lucas with about 532 of my newest friends. That was quite an experience. And I've also seen a number, as I say, a small handful of annulars. See the next slide here, Doug, thanks. So I want to kind of bifurcate tonight's talk and talk about a couple things. The first part, as you can see here, is just a really quick tour or touchstone of the total that occurred, the hybrid, back in April of last year. As I say, I have a little bit of a short video I'd like to share with you. Interestingly enough, by the way, that was my first effort at videoing a total. I'd never done that before. I always was a, if you will, still imager. I was somebody that always took my shots, my pictures through either my telescope or a long telephoto. Never tried video. It's a little intimidating. I thought, what if this, what if that kind of thing. So I was fortunate. I actually got some decent footage there. The other part, though, I really want to concentrate, and I think most of the people here in person, as well as those of you out in, again, the cyberspace audience are interested in, is kind of my take on and just sort of the general circumstances for the eclipse coming up, excuse me, in just under 85 days. So let's get into that part if we can. Doug, next slide. Just to kind of talk about, again, the hybrid eclipse last April. As you can see, this was really quite a bit of trekking, to put it mildly. And as you can see, we actually came, of course, myself, my wife, my family, we're located out in Newbury Park near Thousand Oaks. We flew from Los Angeles to Hawaii, specifically to Maui. We kind of took a quick respite there overnight and then flew from there to Sydney, Australia, spent several days there. Again, Sydney's a great town. It's really, really nice. It's kind of pleasant to be able to, again, spend a little time there being touristy. And then we flew from Sydney all the way across Australia over to the western large city of Perth. We stayed there for one night, again, just to kind of recover from that transcontinental flight. And then we went ahead, we had a SUV that we rented and drove the 750 miles from Perth all the way up again to the extreme northwestern, almost northwestern tip of Australia to the small shire of Exmouth. And a lot of work, something like 10,000 miles worth of travel to go see this extremely brief, as I said, under a minute totality. So again, a lot of work to go see this. Next slide, if we can, Doug. We had a really nice viewing site. I had the, I guess I'll say the foresight to arrange to rent a home, a vacation home for 5 nights in the marina area of Exmouth. Let me not mislead you. Exmouth has about 2,000 people in it, but they also have a lot of vacation homes there for people, again, from Perth or Sydney. It's a big vacation, big beach spot for people to go to, especially in the austral summer, of course, in December, January, February. Anyway, this is the house we leased or rented for those 5 days. Really nice. We didn't have to jump in a car and go find a spot to set up or whatever. Literally that morning, before first contact, we went ahead and set up on this area over here in back of the house, and that was it. We were set. Just sat there and just kind of waited for things to start happening. One of the easiest setups, or if you will, chases of an eclipse I've ever had in that many, again, 50 years. It was just wonderful. And again, it was highly convenient. Next slide, we can, Doug. So this is some video that I took. And again, patience is a virtue. You'll see the thin crescent starting in a couple moments here. This was, as I say, a very, very short eclipse. There you go. Can hit that. Thanks, Doug. And you'll see, as I said, this was kind of a first effort. I typically favor a metal on glass type of filter for partial phases. And let's see, it should be coming up. There you go. Just click on that guy again. Yeah, it did. Hopefully it'll come up now. Let's just see. Now, there, just be patient because it starts off kind of dark. Not because I didn't get any imagery. Let's see. Yeah, just hang on. Let's see. Is it? Yeah, okay, just wait. It'll pop up here. Well, maybe it will. Yikes. Technology. Is it? Don't know if it's playing. Let's see. Hang on a second. Then, no, is it? Oh, ducks. Okay. I apologize. Sorry about that, folks. Well, I'll post it though. I'll make sure we get that. No harm, no foul. So moving on, as far as, again, I really want to focus, as I say, in a way that's okay, because I really want to concentrate on the eclipse coming up in April. So as I say, just about 86 days from now, if you will, 3 more or 2 more lunations. We're going to have a total. This is, of course, as many of you know, the second such total to go across the continental United States in the last 7 years. The last one, as I'm sure many of you fondly remember, is the one that occurred, excuse me, in August of 2017. And the estimate was something like 25 or 30 million people actually saw that eclipse. And that's great. It's really wonderful. As you know, and again, I didn't happen to show a map of the other 21 places other than this eclipse in Australia that I've been to. If you want to see a total solar eclipse, most of the time it involves a lot of travel, going out of the United States, somewhere, you know, in my case, name somewhere, Indonesia, Bolivia, China, Australia, Turkey, Easter Island, as Patty just said, you know, just some really out of the way places that maybe a lot of people wouldn't even think about visiting or going to, save for the fact that there's a total eclipse that goes there. This eclipse path is a little different, of course, than the one 7 years ago. That one started over here in the northwest and then moved along almost the very center of the United States, finally exiting near Charlotte, South Carolina. In this case, it's sort of the opposite, starting off of the coast of Mexico, going through, as you heard, among other places, Mazatlan, and then on into the continental U.S., Texas, through here. The trick this time, folks, however, unlike August, excuse me, of 2017, is going to be picking a place, hopefully, where the weather, not the climate, will be benign, because April can be kind of dicey in a number of places, of course, through the country. Next slide, Doug, if we look at that. So let's look at the prospects of cloud cover and what possibilities are lying out there in terms of what we can deal with. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Doug. Yeah. Do the presentation view. There you go. That's that little guy right there. Keep going over one more. That's it. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Bay. So as you can see, this kind of vibrant colored map, and I want to give credit where it's due. A lot of this data, a lot of these charts are from my colleague Jay Anderson, who retired a number of years ago from Environment Canada. Jay is truly the eclipse maven, if you will. Jay has been doing eclipse weather predicts and information, data dump, whatever, for about 35 or 40 years. Jay knows his stuff, and clearly he really does his homework in terms of prognosticating what the weather prospects would be in certain areas. So as you see from this map, once again, and in this case, you can tell by the legend over here, the color chart, blue is good. You know, blue obviously is good. Then you start getting a little bit of some light green, and then things get kind of dicey, where you're talking about as much as, 60, 70, 80, 90% cloud cover. I do draw your attention, again, not getting overly mathematical. Remember, this is median cloud cover. Remember, median being the 50th percentile. We're not talking about an average. We're not talking about its standard deviation. We're talking about median. So 50%. So half the time this is basically, if you will, spot on. The other half of the time, it may not be exact. But clearly, as you can see in this part of Mexico, things look pretty good. It starts getting a little bit more challenging in southwestern Texas. But as you move up through this path, further and further to the northeast, the weather, at least the climate prospects, get worse and worse and worse. This is unlike 7 years ago in August, where it was almost a flip side of that, where on the coast of Oregon, you typically, get a lot of low stratiform clouds. And then as you move through that path down to the southeast, the weather got better through Wyoming and places like that, Nebraska, etc. But remember, again, that was in August. Next slide. So the average cloud amount along the entire path, starting again over in Mexico and then moving from there into the continental U.S., as I just said, I think this just really underscores the fact that it's going to take both a little bit of savvy and also maybe a bit of luck, if you will, in terms of seeing this eclipse, especially if you're thinking about somewhere in the middle of the United States and or even moving more to the north east part of the country. And here you see it's the average, arithmetic average of cloud cover. In other words, taking in all the data and dividing it. So you've got outliers, you've got things that are literally right, sitting on the middle in terms of the arithmetic or the mathematical average of that cloud cover. But clearly, there's no question that in Mazatlan or Terrero and places like that in Mexico, the weather prospects are quite good. Now, the question being, however, what's it like to travel there? How do you feel about that? That kind of thing. It can be tricky. Interesting, by the way, I believe it's the good folks at Astronomy Magazine. Excuse me. They have a trip that is going to the city of Durango in Mexico. And again, I guess I'll just say it this way, with no slam meant in terms of anything, surreptitious or whatever, that may not be a really wise choice. It's kind of a tricky area. I'll just put it that way. I would not necessarily choose to, put a whole bunch of hundreds of people there. It's a again, a beautiful city, beautiful place. However, you got to think about other things too, in terms of not just the weather. Next slide, if we can, Doug. Thank you. So the path through Mexico, as I say, you can see it's just severe blue. Things look really great there, starting on the coast, moving all the way through there, through Durango and that area up in there, just about shy of the United States border there with, if you will, northeastern Mexico. Puerto Vallarta, I think, is up in here somewhere outside of the track. Yeah, it's outside of the track. Puerto Vallarta is further northwest of there. Yeah. So it's not in the path of totality. If we get the next chart. So then we start looking at the continental United States, Texas, Arkansas, Missouri. You see this area here, and there's a fair amount of green here. This isn't too bad. You're kind of getting greenish or bluish green in this region here. And once again, I know people a lot of times are very, very dead set on trying to get to the center line, the very middle of the path. And that's all fine and dandy. I would just suggest to people that's not necessary in the big picture of things. If you're some way part of the way out from center line, that's okay. Indeed, there are actually people and investigators, experimenters who are really interested in, if you will, the limits, the southern or northern limit effects. One of the people that does that a lot is my colleague and friend Paul Malley of Johnson Space Center. Paul's got, I think, actually closer to about 28 or 30 eclipses under his belt, and he really likes to look at the limit effects and those things at the edge, if you will, of the path, because again, those effects can be rather dramatic, interesting, whatever. But once again, center line's great. The other problem, of course, in Texas is that in the hill country here, there aren't a whole heck of a lot of interstate highways. They're mostly very small, 2-lane state roads, things like that. So if you're going to be chasing this thing, that's not the easiest thing to do. Next slide here, Doug. So then, of course, the path goes up into, as you see, Indiana, Kentucky, and Ohio. Now you've got not just green, but actually you're getting more into this region of 60, 70% median possibility or probability of clouds. So that starts looking a little bit dreary in terms of thinking about going somewhere like that. And it's not to say that it's impossible for someone to see the eclipse in one of these places. Not at all. Again, that's a matter of kind of crapshoot, but it's also just, once again, you kind of make your choice, you take your risk, and you do what you think is most prudent. Next slide, a little bit further along, the track actually nicks part of the northwestern corner of Pennsylvania up into then the main part of New York State. So you can see, once again, there are patches, areas that's a little bit better than others, other than 80 or 90%. It gets pretty decent in terms of that 70% or 72% median cloud cover. But once more, it's not ideal. It's not perfect. And it's a matter of, if you're going to do something like that, you better think about mobility, what you can do to make a last minute rush or a last minute chase to try to see it. Next chart. So finally, the path basically through the last part of the continental U.S. and actually into one of the maritime provinces of Canada. As you can see, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, and New Brunswick. And things start to look really kind of dreary. At that point, you're really touching on about 90% or so of median cloud cover. Not real great. Remember, again, this is April, first part of April. We're just barely getting into spring at that point. So Once again, if you like gambling, I know when I worked at Griffith Observatory many moons ago as a part-time staff member or guide, that in talking to Ed Krupp there, Ed always likes to say, eclipse chasing is like one of the more benign forms of gambling that you can get involved in. I agree with that. The only thing is, it's true. Unlike going to Vegas or something, it isn't the same thing. However, it still can drain your bank account. It can certainly do a number of things that way if you're really serious and trying to see as many of these as you can. Next chart, and so obviously April, first thing people think about is this. And again, Jay was very fastidious in mapping the history over about the last 67 or 68 years of tornado incidences in the continental US in April. And I think this chart speaks a lot to, again, what not is going to happen, but possibly historically has happened. One of the nice things about southwestern Texas, and you see the path again along here, it's actually pretty decent. But the further northeast you go, especially in Tornado Alley and here in Oklahoma, Missouri, I don't know, yikes. I don't know if I'd like to combine a tornado with a total eclipse. It might be kind of a little scary. Next chart. So let me take a minute to kind of not so much give a tutorial, but I think just kind of, if you will, toss out some ideas and some thoughts that you might want to think about for those of you who are interested in trying to see this next total in April, on the 8th of April. And again, I'm not going to read every one of these things to you, but certainly the first question is going to be, do you have time? How much time do you have to go see this thing? Is it going to be part of your vacation or something else? Or again, are your kids going to be in school if you want to bring your youngsters to see this? Is that going to be possible? Are you going to be able to get them out of their classes? Again, there are some good, but also sadly some really scary stories about people who have parents who have tried to take their children out of school for a week or 5 days, whatever it is, to see an eclipse like the one in 2017. And they kind of ran into a wall where they were told, no, you can't do that. We've got classes that they've got to attend and all that kind of thing. Never mind the fact that that eclipse was the first one in the continental US for some ridiculous amount of time, many decades. The next one, is this going to be your first total? Your first total. I'm kind of curious, by the way, how many people here, I'm talking about here, I can't see, obviously, in terms of all the folks out in virtual land, how many people have seen a total here? Okay, good. Quite a few. So for many of you, it's not going to be your first total. That's a good thing to know. Also, the things about what about your resources? I think it speaks to that very directly. Obviously, money, transportation, those kind of things. The type and amount of equipment you want to take. Over the half century that I've been doing this, I've found certainly in the last 8 or 10 years, I've had to cut back with the amount of equipment and things I've brought. So these days I try to travel relatively light, even though, again, this eclipse coming up, especially say going to somewhere like Texas, you're talking about, maybe an hour and a half flight over to say places like a place like Phoenix or even Las Vegas to connect and go to like Dallas or San Antonio. You can be pretty, if you will, facile that way. You can bring a small amount of equipment, not a big deal. My days of bringing so much equipment and so much stuff that you need again, a pack mule to do that. I don't do that anymore. It's not necessary. In terms of, as I say, not only your primary plan, but what about plan B, C, D? Do you have backup plans in terms of what you're going to do? Certainly, if the weather doesn't cooperate or you miss a flight or something else happens, what are you going to do? You know, what can you do? Fortunately, again, this is a domestic eclipse, unlike going to a foreign country like Chile or somewhere like, again, Bolivia, somewhere like, again, any of those places, Indonesia. Getting around or getting a flight into those venues is really, really critical. And if something happens, again, I'll even touch on, try to be somewhat humorous. You know, you're on a Boeing 737 MAX 9. This could be a problem. You know, if there's a problem with the cabin or the plug, the thing turns around and goes back to the airport. You know, the Eclipse isn't going to wait for you. Yeah, exactly.
Investigation a day or two early.
Yeah. Well, that's what Doug's saying is always plan, among other things, try to get there not the day before. And there's actually kind of a rule that many of us have been doing this for decades say, and that is exactly, you should really try to be either in the path or certainly just close to the limit of the path about 24 to 36 hours before, because you don't know what can happen. Stuff happens, and that's kind of making a nice thing of that old expression. Finally, as it says, the last point, how badly do you really want to see this? How much effort are you willing to extend, if you will, or expend to go see this? This is a personal choice. It's something to think about. Next slide, Doug. So just a little bit of some advice, and some of this, again, many of the people sitting here tonight, you're experienced eclipse chasers or eclipse participants. So some of this is kind of QED. It's something that people kind of already know or figured out. But certainly one of the things is have a plan and work it. Obviously, that's important to do that because just doing it kind of off the cuff is kind of not necessarily advisable. Practice your routine. If you're going to do photography, videography, practice it. Practice it a lot. When I first started chasing these things back 45, 50 years ago, I actually would set up my camera and everything else, my telescope in my house. I would have like a clock or a timer, whatever. I'd turn off all the lights in the house and I just start practicing. I had a a cassette tape, show you how long ago that was, a cassette tape calling off the time. So I would practice it in such a way that I could almost do it blindfolded, or certainly, as I say, in the dark, even though we all know it doesn't get totally dark during second to third contacts. But I did that to practice it, so I knew my routine cold. I knew exactly what I was going to do. Obvious third point, again, even for the folks here who are experienced, don't take the entire time during totality to take pictures or do video or stick your eye up to an eyepiece or a viewfinder. That is really not advisable because you're missing a whole other part of the experience. The shadow approach, possibly seeing shadow bands, that kind of thing. Some of the other effects, looking at, again, the 360-degree sunset effect, turning around, just stopping and just kind of looking around. Because these things, even one of my good friends for many years said, every eclipse, no matter what its duration is supposed to be, every eclipse is like 2 minutes long. Even the 6-minute ones or 4-minute ones, they're like 2 minutes long. They're there and suddenly that's it. And you can't replay it. You can't do, a playback or something. That's it. So think about that. Think about that, because especially if you have other people with you or you're part of a group, whatever, it's okay. You don't have to spend your whole time taking pictures. There are other people who will be there that either or maybe just happen to run into, who also will be photographing this thing. And it's always very much of a good bet that people will exchange pictures or videos. So if you didn't get something, or you got so mesmerized by looking at totality that you forgot, or you left your filter on, gosh forbid, or something like that, it's okay, because there are other people that will share with you. Doug.
But just to add a thing into it, I'm sorry to barge in. Take pictures of the environment as before you get to that total eclipse. Take a 360 or several 360s of where you are and what you're doing, and it makes a difference because you won't remember that compared to seeing the eclipse. And our little granddaughter played with bugs while we were doing the eclipse. It's one of the best pictures we ever got. So anyway, take a picture of your environment, and then when the totality comes, devote yourself to that. Because as you said, it says 4 minutes. It seems like 30 seconds.
Yeah, it does. Doug's right. And you know,
These are lessons Joel taught me before we went on one of his eclipse trips.
well, that's very nice. I don't know if I taught those, but the other thing is, you know, there's no question. There's so much going on, not just again where the eclipse is, and as Doug just said, the effects and everything else. Another thing, of course, I wouldn't say they're obligatory. Things like taking pictures of the crescent sun being projected through gaps in, say, leaves of a tree, if there's a tree nearby, onto the ground. I just did that actually at the annular in October of this past year. I went out to the area where this mob of 400 people I'm going to have, it's going to be in Texas, and it was raining. So I immediately got in my car, drove back like a banshee back to San Antonio to the hotel where I was staying, and just basically walked out, sat down on the sidewalk. There was a little bit of a wall there, a short wall, and you know, had my filter, a glass filter with me, and I just watched it, you know, because once again, there are times there's stuff, folks, you can't control, but there's other things other than those projected images of the crescent sun. You can do other things. Among other stuff, people like to take pictures of people with their eclipse glasses staring up there. That's great. I mean, as I say, it's not obligatory, but it's always kind of an interesting picture. See a bunch of people doing that. A couple other things, bullet points here. Be mobile. Definitely do all you can to be mobile, especially with this eclipse. Mobility, I think, is going to win the day, at least for some people, a number of people. Clearly, with 400 people, it's a little tough to be very mobile. How do you move 400 people around the last minute? That's kind of a challenge. But fortunately, having done this with groups for about 40 years, I have some experience doing that. But again, you're not going to hurt them, you know, like a whole bunch of whatever cattle or something. I mean, it's really tough to move people the last minute and say, everybody on the buses, let's go. That's kind of a tough one. Finally, and this is an old meteorological or meteorologist expression, as it says up there, you know, climate is what you expect, but weather is what you get. So on any one day, I don't care what climatically or climatologically things are. The fact is, it's once again, in some ways, a crapshoot. You know, on any one particular day, the weather can be completely different of what you might be expecting. Okay, with that in mind, here are some really useful Eclipse websites that I've kind of collected here. Many of you probably know about some of these. One of the ones, my good friend Xavier Hubier, really expert in terms of overlays on Google Maps. Xavier, in the last 35 years, has really made it almost a no-brainer to be able to go to his site, pick a particular eclipse, total, annular, that kind of thing, and then literally zoom in on the track, the path, and pick a particular coordinate or spot and see things like the duration, the contact times, first, second, third, and fourth contact, solar altitude, its azimuth, all of that. It's just amazing what Xavier's been able to do, and I highly recommend that site. Another one, Jay Anderson, I talked about a little while ago, my friend Jay Anderson, he has a site called Eclipsophile. That's a nice one. I still like Umbra Addict myself personally. I think it's kind of a more whatever descriptive thing. National Weather Service, of course, there are so many products now that NWS has that you can avail yourself of course, for free. And what's more, the blessing of this whole thing for this eclipse in April is it's domestic. So there's so much data, so many, again, forecasts and detailed forecasts that you can look at that will really help you make an informed decision about where you really should be or where you might have to run off to, so to speak, to increase your chances. Spectrum telescope, there are some folks out in Thousand Oaks area. They are one of the big suppliers or vendors for solar eclipse filters for any kind of optical device, whether it's a telephoto or again a telescope, etc. They have both, if you will, soft filters, meaning the ones that are like Mylar and have a coating on that, as well as metal on glass filters. My particular favorite. Rainbow Symphony, I'm sure you've heard of them. They're also actually out in the valley in Reseda, California. They make a bazillion Eclipse glasses. They're very reasonable, something like, even you get a dozen of them or something, they're like $8. They're less than $1 each. I know the other day, I think Patty and I were at Albertson's supermarket and we saw a display of Eclipse glasses there, and there were something like $3 or $4 each. So, again, you pay your money and you take your choice, I guess. And then finally, the last site there you see in blue, that is Fred Espinak's Eclipse site that he's had for many, many years. Fred is lovingly known as Mr. Eclipse. And again, Fred has just a huge amount of information, both photographic and also, if you will, viewing suggestions, that kind of thing that you can use to help yourself prepare for the eclipse coming up in April. Well, with that, that should be, with all due respect to Warner Brothers or Porky, that's kind of the conclusion of my presentation. Let me just ask, and I know time is of the essence here. Do we have some questions that I can answer? I'll kind of try to go and work my way from back to front. Yes. Okay, excellent question. So the question for the folks who may not have heard it out in virtual land, what's a hybrid eclipse? So of course, you have totals, you have partials, that kind of thing, annulars. What's a hybrid? A hybrid eclipse basically is such that at either the western or eastern terminus of the path, the eclipse is annular, very thin annulus. As you then move from typically, of course, west to east along the track, the eclipse then becomes total, very brief totality, but it becomes total. Why is that? Well, because of course, as the path is moving across the surface of the earth, remember the beginning and end of the eclipse, the shadow of the moon or anti-umbra, if you're talking about the annular eclipse, is very, very oblique. It's very, very flat in terms of just above the horizon. As you get further along the track, not only does the lunar shadow get more, if you will, orthogonal to the surface of the earth, but the surface of the earth is curved. And so it actually moves you closer, if you will, into the shadow, such that now, instead of it being an ant umbra, I guess opposed to Uncle Umbra, ant umbra, that it becomes the full umbra. But again, it's a very brief totality. And as you move on toward the eastern terminus of the west to east track, it becomes annular again. So it's a combination. It's a combination of an annular at either end and a very short total in the middle. Long answer to a short question. I thought I saw another thing. Yes. Good question. You're talking about at this upcoming eclipse. Pretty good. It's interesting. Again, I'm sorry that the video didn't play. The apparent diameters, the difference in the diameters this time between the moon and the sun are such, the moon is going to be fairly substantially large in terms of that. There is a good chance of that. The only thing is, unlike, once again, a hybrid or very, very short, say 1 minute eclipse, that the chromosphere will probably not appear for very long. Again, I apologize because the video also showed, I don't know how many of you've seen pictures or other things of that eclipse, some spectacular prominences, really amazing stuff. And remember, we're getting very close now to solar maximum in terms of activity. So I wouldn't be surprised if there are more really interesting, not just hedgerow, but other spectacular kinds of prominences. The chromosphere will probably be visible, but it won't be for very long because the moon is so relatively large, maybe about 2 or 3% larger this time than the solar diameter. That's going to happen. You'll see it a little bit, but then really you're going to get totality for, like, most of the places along the track. It's about 4 minutes, close to 4 minutes. So you got a fairly large occulting disk there, and that's going to move it. Yeah. Yeah. In fact, as I mentioned about Paul Malley, Paul has made his stock and trade of being at the north or south limit because, yes, that effect, you still get totality barely. But yes, if you're right on the limit, north or south limit of the track, those phenomena like chromosphere, even prominences, that kind of thing, shadow bands, they tend to get enhanced or extended because you're not in the very middle of the path. You're at one edge or the other. The only thing I would suggest if you're thinking about doing that is you got to be really sure where you're going to be in terms of both GPS coordinates. Go to Xavier's site because his stuff is very accurate, but there is a little slop there. So I would say if you're going to do anything, be more conservative by just being inside the limit. Don't play footsie with trying to be right on the very edge of it. You may miss it. It's funny, in 1981, in 81, myself, Steve Edberg, a bunch of other people, we chartered a Hawaiian Airlines DC-9, boy, that was how long ago that was, and took out all the seats on the right-hand side of the aircraft. And we flew it out of, or it was flown for us, I didn't fly it, out of Oahu to intercept the eclipse off of Kauai by about 400 miles because the shadow had literally lifted off the earth at that point. There was a private jet flying maybe about 8,000 feet above us almost in formation. We saw totality was about 20 seconds. And then we saw a video from the people in the private jet. And I guess somebody didn't know what they were doing, or they didn't know about their navigation or whatever. And you hear people are saying, "Oh, look." And suddenly you hear somebody about a minute later saying, "I think we missed it." So, this takes you got to be really precise about some of this stuff. I didn't do the navigation. At the time, we actually had Omega. We didn't have a GPS. We had an Omega system, but we nailed it. But I got to tell you, it's even for people who supposedly know what they're doing. Sometimes they mess up. Things happen. Surely, yeah. If there's anybody out there online that has a question.
Is there anybody?
Look, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. So there are a couple of questions people want clarification. So those of us who cannot travel, will the eclipse be visible throughout the United States, perhaps partially, or are there parts that there would be no eclipse? And then any advices for those of us who have to stay where we are?
Good question, Sid. So the answer is yes, it will be visible. Of course, I was just concentrating on the track of totality, but yes, it will be widely visible as a partial through the United States. I forget, and forgive me, again, that information, once again, with Xavier's website, you can click outside of the track of totality, the path of totality, to see what percentage, maximum percent of the sun's disk will be covered. So yes, it's going to be widely visible throughout the continental United States. Again, of course, the question being, what about weather? You know, here we are again in the first week of April, in question of that kind of thing. So yes, it will be visible. But again, you'll probably, and I need to caution, so another thing, this is interesting with the media, and I've dealt with the media on this stuff before. You probably won't see a lot of coverage about the eclipse until about 3 days before it happens, because that's the way the media work in this country. And that is, yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, it's really spectacular, blah, 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 blah. But they don't pick up the story or share information about where can I see it, how visible is it, etc., until about 72 or so hours beforehand. That's why I suggest with those, again, those sites I talked about, it's good to go to those sites and check those out beforehand. But yes, it will be very much highly visible, weather permitting, throughout a lot of the U.S. Here, especially in Southern California, we're still a ways away from, of course, mainland central Mexico, but it should be a pretty decent partial. It's about 70, Doug just said, about 70 or so % here, which isn't bad. It's interesting. Remember, of course, it's a partial. So at no time should you attempt to look at that without proper filtration or proper filters, because it's a partial, and obviously you don't normally stare at the sun. In this case, even a 70% partial, it's really dangerous. And there's always somebody or some bodies, even at a total, that ignore that or don't realize you can look at it only without any filtration during totality, not before, even when it's 98%. The sun's energy, if you will, the light from the photosphere is extremely powerful. And so you don't want to damage your eyes, but people get confused. It's like, well, can I look at it? Can't I look at it? But yes, it will be very, very visible as a partial through a lot of the US. Yeah. Other questions online?
Yes, there's
Sure.
one more type of questions that we've been receiving online, and that is, you of course emphasize that when there is totality, let's focus on the actual experience, not photographing it or taking pictures. But first of all, have you worked on live streaming the eclipse? Are there any live streaming sources besides the general media that have high quality that you advise? And also, in terms of if somebody wants to record it, what kind of equipment do you suggest?
Okay, so I'll take those in serial order, that is, as you just posed them. There are and shall be a number of setups of professional, again, television media people out along the path. I know for one place, amongst others, there is going to be a news crew in the town of Kerrville, Texas, which isn't quite on the center line. It's a little bit, I think, north of the center line, but still within the path of totality. I believe that's a NASA feed through NASA. They will be showing it, of course, again, you know, weather permitting, and there's no clouds or, you know, very brief things. They'll be doing it. I'm not sure, maybe the space.com people may be doing that as well. But there definitely are sources or places where you can watch a live stream. And you're right, also the media, of course, you know, the main networks will have crews in several other places. I wouldn't be surprised if they have some of them in the Midwest, maybe Missouri or whatever, maybe even the Northeast. Not so sure how successful they're going to be. And I'm sorry, the other question was about, you said, oh, about equipment. So my experience, as I said, as a first-time videoer, and I think maybe a good idea, Doug, I can drop or do a Dropbox thing for the video. If people are curious, I can send that.
Well, if
no.
you send it to me, I can post it online on our website. If
That'd be great. That'd be really good. I'd be happy to do that. So answering that question though, so what I did and what most people do, there's a couple of cautions about video. Number one, and of course, especially video cameras today, or even what I used a video camera, used a digital SLR. My Nikon 3300 is, I attached that to a zoom telephoto. I think it was an Optica zoom, and I went to about I think it was about 1,000 millimeters. But remember, if you have a sub full frame camera like a D3300, you actually need to increase that, if you will, focal length by about 6/10 or about half. So I was actually photographing closer to about 1,500, 1,600 millimeter focal length. But the important things there are, number one, and since most DSLRs and or video cameras now use CCDs, there's very little likelihood that you can burn anything out. This isn't like a Vidicon tube or something like that years ago. However, it's still prudent prior to totality to keep a solar filter at the objective or front end of your telephoto lens for your camera, or your telescope if you have your camera or video recorder attached to it with a T-mount or whatever, to keep that filter on until just before second contact. Now, again, the thing with that, of course, you need a tripod, very sturdy tripod, and hopefully you have some kind of remote trigger so that you're not sitting there pushing on the camera or pushing on the video camera to do it. The other thing, by the way, use manual setting. Set your camera up or your video for manual, because otherwise, if you have it on autofocus or auto exposure, you got problems, because now the camera gets or the video gets all confused and it says, oh, it's too bright, I'll just shut this down, or scope it down or focus down or whatever. And now you got nothing. You got blackness. And it's like, what happened?
And that proves your point. All of a sudden you'll get distracted and fiddling with the camera and you'll miss the eclipse.
Yeah, and that has happened. Again, I didn't say anything about, I said about repairs. Doug made a great point. Know your equipment, practice with it. But as I say, it's important to have that filter. But the real question, I'm sure some people say, they're probably wondering is, so when do I take my filter off, whether it's still camera or video or whatever? And the answer is, it's almost a sense of feel. And again, after 22 of these, I don't know. There's some weird thing in my brain, and I just know when the moment is right. Why? Well, first of all, if you're with some other people who are experienced, they're going to say filters off. I mean, take your filter off. Okay. And that's fine, because totality is imminent. It's happening right then. There are some people that cheat and try and do it maybe a minute or two before second contact, before totality starts. I've done that a few times. I happen to know what I'm doing. I don't sit there and stare at it and do that kind of thing, but I can take the filter off, and I have a sense of that when the gentleman asked about chromosphere and that kind of thing, because I want to try to capture that, but it's really tricky. You have to kind of have some experience. But again, it's really a matter of feel. But if you're in a group or even a few people around you, when you hear people say filters off, take your, just as at the end of totality, at third contact, they'll hear people say, put your filters on, do that. Again, not so much about ruining the camera, but just, you need to do that. What can I say? I mean, that's a tricky thing. People get really mixed up, and it's like, well, is it safe or isn't it safe? Or yeah. So
Joel, here's what happens. And it happened on your trip, that you're fiddling with the equipment, you get it all just set up, and the eclipse happens and 200 people go, whoa, and people are crying, and you go, what? And you look up and you see the eclipse and you forget to change the camera and you have no film of it whatsoever.
yeah, well,
So you really have to think about that ahead of time. Am I going to watch the eclipse? What happens if everything screws up? The plug comes out of the camera and the battery goes to zero. Bail on it. Look up. When in doubt. Am I right, Joel?
well, yeah, and tagging on what Doug said. So I've had that happen too, where again, there was an annular in 1994. I was over in Morocco with some people, and we were all set up. It was right at sunset. I didn't want to see it here in the US because I really wanted to see it near sunset. Make a long story short, because I know we're short on time, I was sitting there, a car full of tourists. We're up in the Atlas Mountains. A car full of tourists stopped. I think they were Dutch or something. And they were saying, what are you doing here? What are you? And I said, well, there's an annular eclipse going to happen here. It's happening here. So I went through this whole big lecture rigmarole, whatever. And I had two cameras set up, so everything was fine. And I said, okay, it's starting now. And annularity happened. And I was taking pictures. I brought my cameras back to the hotel in Meknes in Morocco. And I go in there, and my main camera with a large telephoto on it, I sit there and I hit the rewind button and started rewinding. There was no resistance. And I kept winding and winding. And I thought, what the Sam Hill is going on? So I turned off the light in the bathroom where I was, stuffed a towel under the bottom of the door there, opened up the back of the camera. No film. No film. Fortunately, I had a backup camera. Everything was fine. I got my imagery. But Doug's right. And I've had other things happen. I've had equipment fall in my hands. In 1983, I was in Indonesia on Java, and I was using equipment I was not familiar with, that I had my camera on a T-mount sitting there. Everything will look like it was fine. I started taking pictures just before totality, and suddenly, and it was a fairly high altitude for the sun, the camera falls out in my hand. What happened was the set screws on the T-mount got loose during our drive from our hotel to where we were observing, and the camera fell out in my hands. And for about 10 seconds, I tried to push the camera back up in there and fix it. And I suddenly thought, I sound like Stanley Tucci in The Core. What the am I doing? And I took the camera and set it down on the ground and just watched, because that's precious time, folks. I mean, don't try to affect the repair. Not going to happen. Or if you forget to take your filter off, I've never done that, but other people I know have. It's okay. It's okay. Somebody else will get imagery. Couldn't tell if somebody's raising their hand or yes, sir. Okay, I'll take them in order. In terms of Bailey's, sure. The question, sorry for you folks out there. So the question is, what's a likelihood of seeing things like Bailey's beads? I'm sorry, shadow bands, that kind of thing. Those kind of things. So Bailey's beads are almost always a certainty. And again, I apologize the fourth time. The video, actually, there were some pretty profound, I guess I'll say, Bailey's beads for this hybrid that I saw back in April last year. So Bailey's beads are almost a given. In fact, usually for the experienced folks, when you see Bailey's beads just before second contact, that's when you hear people screaming, take your filters off and that kind of thing. Shadow bands. Shadow bands are a little more tricky. I have seen them a couple of times. I have not photographed them. They are notoriously hard to photograph because they're very low contrast. What's the best way to try to see them? Well, first of all, hopefully, if you're somewhere where there is a uniform ground cover, uniform ground level, like with just some dirt, kind of light colored dirt, or you're near a building that has a light colored wall that's beige or white, that's a thing. But here's the key, and they don't always, excuse me, show up. The key is, don't try to look directly at them. Use averted vision, and you'll know if they're happening. If the wall is here and you're kind of like this looking or whatever, and you're over here at the side, you'll know if they're happening because they're scintillating. They'll basically be going quickly, very quickly, about a couple meters a second. You'll see that kind of scintillation at the corner of your eye. You'll see them. That's it. But not every time, because it depends on the atmospherics, things like that. Yeah, it really, it's a, you don't know. And at the annular, I think some people said last October they saw shadow bands. I did not see any, but again, big suggestion, don't look directly for them. Use your averted vision and see if you get that scintillation out the corner of your eye. If you do, then you certainly can look at them, but just remember to first pick them up, you got to use averted vision. At what point would you look for them? First, I'm sorry, second contact just before totality, because when Bailey's beads also, when shadow bands occur, it means that totality, especially for second kind, it means totality is imminent, like 20 seconds away or something very, very soon. Just the same thing at third. I have not seen them at third contact. That's the same idea. As the shadow and as the moon's limb moves away from covering the solar disk, you might see them. You might. Usually the best bet is just before second contact, because that's, again, the sun is becoming a point source as opposed to, again, a diffuse source. I don't know how many of you have been to eclipses where, especially for totality, where maybe 10, 20 minutes before second contact, the light gets really weird, gets really strange. And if you take your hand and project a shadow onto the ground, it's really different, because in one direction, where it's not polarized, you see a very diffuse shadow. If you turn your hand 90 degrees orthogonally to where you were holding it, the shadow of your hand is extremely distinct and very sharp, because that light from the last little sliver of the photosphere is very polarized. And as you turn your hand like that, you'll see that. That is really weird, aside from just the fact that a lot of color, things like, especially bright colors like red or things like that, start to look washed out. They look really washed out because the light is becoming a point source, not a diffuse type of source that we usually have. So again, as Doug said, and Barbara kind of alluded to, I believe also, if you're just spending your whole time looking through a viewfinder or a camera or whatever, even just before second contact, you're missing a lot. And the problem is you can't catch everything at once, because stuff's going on in the ground. Something's happening up there. The shadow's approaching you. People are yelling, as Doug said, screaming and everything. You'll get a sore neck doing this. So I guess my answer to all that is go to another one. Yeah. Do something else the next time. Or gosh forbid, if you miss it because it was not, the weather was no bueno, so to speak. I thought I saw another question, or maybe, yes, sir. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah, let me interpret that. No, it's not it's not a whole minute. I would say maybe a few, like 15 seconds, 20 seconds before second contact, and certainly right after third contact has occurred. It's always safe. It's better to be safe than sorry, and slam the filter back on there, because again, it's sort of unlikely you're going to ruin the CCD, but you don't want to take that chance. Yeah, I agree with you. It's like 10, 15 seconds. Once again, when beads happen, that's the time certainly you can take the filter off, because you don't want to miss that, or you don't want your pictures to miss that. But as soon as you see beads coming out, essentially on the other side, not exactly, depends. You see those beads at third contact, yeah, got to put the filter on. Got to do that. And I'm sorry, the other question says, where am I going? Yeah, okay. So I have been researching this and doing this setup in preparation for this mob I'm going to have for about 5 years. We're going to be in southwestern Texas, okay, because I think the prospects there are pretty good. They're not perfect. Again, you take your chances. Let me just say, by the way, some people are very confused. San Antonio, if you go to San Antonio, the problem is the main part of San Antonio is not in the path. It's just outside the southern limit. You'd have to be in the northwestern corner of San Antonio to just barely catch totality. The path just nicks that. So the fact of the matter is, if you're going to go to San Antonio, say as your base of operations or whatever, you're going to have to get out of town. You either got to go to the northwest by 60 or 70 miles, or even to the southwest to get into the path. And there are state roads, state highways, 2-lane, I think a couple 4-lane roads there that are good to use there. But remember, the morning of the eclipse, wherever you want to go, Kerrville or Fredericksville or Fredericksburg rather, or whatever, everybody and their dog is going to be on the road, so be prepared. You may want to leave at some ridiculous hour like 4 a.m. or 3 a.m. or something to make sure you don't get caught. Because again, if you're caught in a traffic jam and the eclipse starts, that's not good. Oh, as I say, southwest Texas in the area, not at the border, but a little bit off the border to the northeast of there. I'll just put it that way. Yeah. Yeah. Oh no, we do have a specific place. Oh yeah, for sure. I usually just, again, requesting, at least with the video, I just read it roll on a manual. I think I was working at like F13 or something with the telephoto I had. And basically, I guess because of that particular camera, I can't control the shutter speed on it. It just because it's video. Generally speaking, with still photography, bracket. You really need to bracket. You need to go really crazy, 2, 3 exposures on either side, but obviously, again, it's sort of a matter of, especially because the cameras today, you can just take zillions of pictures and something, if you've got a chip in there, I should say a memory card in there and whatever, and you've taken the filter off, you're going to get something, but you've got to bracket. You really need to bracket like crazy, with your exposure time and everything. Okay, I know the time is nigh. So if you have any other questions, certainly I'm sure we can field those or capture them.
If there are any others online before we.
Okay. Any others that I can
Yes,
deal
the
with?
final question. You did mention it a couple of times while answering other questions, but just to set the record straight, can you tell us when do we need to exactly take off or put on a filter during the eclipse?
Yeah, once again, during a total, the time to take the filter off is normally when you perceive and you see and that thin crescent, that the 2 horns of the crescent are closing in. When you see beads or you hear people yelling, Bailey's beads, beads, whatever, you definitely can take your filter off then. Conversely, after totality gets pretty much done and you're close to third contact, the end of totality, you'll again hear people yelling Bailey's beads or whatever, put your filters on. That's when you should do it. So when those beads make their appearance, that's at either end, either second contact or third. That's when you should either take off or put your filter back on, respectively. Yeah.
Great.
No, I would suggest visually look at it. Don't worry about, you don't need a telescope to really take in the whole experience. I think we're really, Barb.
Yeah, I think Joel will hang around a while to answer further questions, but just so we don't shortchange the people online, Arisa, were there any other questions that we should be getting to from there before we close down?
No other question. All done online.
Great. Then thank you all very much. Thank you all very much online. It's been a great presentation. Thank you so much, Joel. Yeah. Yeah. I hope all of you are thinking seriously about what you are going to be doing in early April. April 8th, that's the magic date. And with that, we will say farewell for this meeting and see you all next month. And again, get those votes in if you haven't yet. Bye-bye, everybody.
Oh, bye.
Thanks, Barb.